They never forgot that morning. When they saw the school gardener for the first time, no one could imagine what was about to happen. He wasn't just a man with a shovel and a rake. To them, he was a reason for laughter, an easy target. A familiar face, yes, but invisible at the same time. Humble, quiet, always in the background. The kind of person who goes unnoticed so often that you hardly even realize when they're right in front of you. However, the school was about to change forever. And the twist was in his hands, the man everyone thought insignificant. It was a Monday, and the group of students was chatting in the hallways before classes started. They mocked the gardener with a mixture of cruelty and innocent fun. "Do you really think someone like him could be in charge of anything important here?" they said, while imitating his calm way of walking. They didn't understand that behind that simple overalls and hard-working hands, there was something more, something none of them could have anticipated. Then class hours began, the usual routine, the noise in the courtyard, the gossip in the bathrooms. But that day, news started to rumble through the halls, first like a whisper, then like an unstoppable wave. The principal had resigned. The school needed someone to take the reins. And the new principal was no ordinary name. The next day, they saw him enter the main office wearing an impeccable suit. He was not the worn-out gardener they had assumed, no. He was someone completely different, someone who radiated authority and respect. And, even more surprising, he was the very same gardener. A mixture of disbelief, confusion, and why not, a little fear began to take hold of them. How could someone dressed so humbly and clearly removed from power now hold absolute command? It all started with a simple question. Who is this man really? And what followed was much more than an answer. An almost comical scene unfolded in the morning, hours before the truth was revealed. The young students had seen him, they breathed too loudly, exchanged the classic looks among themselves, each one more mocking than the last. The gardener appeared picking up dry leaves, carefully blowing the dust off each one. "Looks like he really likes his job," one murmured, letting out a laugh that quickly spread. But that comment, spoken aloud, was the spark that unleashed an avalanche. "Maybe he thinks he's the boss here," said another. "If only you knew what awaits us," responded a voice from the back, with a mix of mystery and challenge. The seed of disconnection was planted. They thought they knew this man. They saw him only as a cleaner, someone invisible in the vast machinery of the school. But what happens when the machine stops and that simple cog turns out to be the one driving it? What came next was a rapid succession of events no one had foreseen. The rumor about the new principal spread faster than the wind. The image they had of that man began to wobble. Conversations shifted from open mockery to puzzled whispers. An announcement over the loudspeaker interrupted classes, inviting everyone to attend the official announcement in the main hall. Uncertainty pulsed in the air. Who would lead now? A stranger? An external administrator? None of that. The man they had always avoided, ignored, was about to make the biggest move. When he entered dressed in his suit and confident smile, the silence was absolute. It wasn't just his appearance, but his posture, his voice, his natural authority. Every word he spoke was precise, calm, yet charged with a power no one expected. He clearly explained his vision for the school, his plans to improve things, to make everyone feel part of a common project. The students who had once mocked couldn't help but feel how their ridicule turned against themselves. The man they had underestimated, whose presence they had dismissed, was now at the helm of the institution. And not only that. From that moment on, they began to see new things, details they had previously ignored. The dedication with which he cared for the garden was, in fact, a metaphor for what he planned to do with the educational community. Nurture, grow, transform. The questions never stopped. How had he gotten here? What was his story? Why had he started in a low position only to later reveal his true identity? And, most puzzling, what lessons did they have to learn from all this? Scenes changed quickly. From arrogance and haughtiness, they moved to reflection and amazement. The boy who led the teasing shyly approached the new principal a few days later, and in an unexpected gesture, apologized. The Gardner principal looked at him with a smile that mixed understanding and firmness, replying, "Here we all have something to learn." The transformation, however, was just beginning. Because the new principal didn't come just with a suit and authority. His story hid secrets, difficult decisions, sacrifices, and a vision that went far beyond mere school administration. Each day brought a new challenge, a new test for the group of students who had to rethink every judgment. From restructuring the school to new rules, every change stirred a different range of emotions. Sometimes hope, sometimes rebellion, sometimes admiration. What no one could deny was that this man, whom so many despised, was leaving a deep mark. Not only on the school, but on each person who had underestimated him and now saw that respect is not earned by titles or appearance, but by coherence and courage. And the question that lingered in the air, for everyone without exception, was one that still had no definitive answer. What more was this invisible man who now ruled the scene going to teach them? What other certainties were about to change forever? The story of the gardener who became principal was not just a tale of surprise or poetic justice. It was an implicit invitation to look beyond appearances, to question prejudices, and to understand that sometimes the humblest people carry within them the power to transform the world. The echo of that revelation reverberated in the corridors for weeks. Some didn't know whether to laugh, regret, or admire. But everyone agreed on one thing: nothing would ever be the same at that school again. Every day since then began with the uncertainty of not knowing what else might happen. And each one, in their own way, wondered if they themselves were ready to change, grow, and be more than mere spectators in this story. And while the leaves fell and the garden flourished under a new gaze, so too did the spirit of those students. They learned to respect, to appreciate what each person could contribute, and, above all, to never judge without knowing. So next time you see someone just doing their job, think twice. Because maybe you're facing someone who, when you least expect it, will show you that true power lies in humility, perseverance, and the ability to surprise the world. And that all of us, without exception, carry inside us that seed waiting to bloom. They can't believe it, can they? That man whom everyone ignored, the humble and quiet gardener, turned out to be much more than he seemed. And everything took a turn that no one saw coming. If only they knew the full story, they would understand why their world changed in an instant. Because that's life. Appearances deceive, and the people you least expect can hold the greatest power. Who would have imagined that the man with worn gloves and muddy boots, who picked up leaves while students mocked him, was actually the new school principal? Lincoln High School was a place where everything seemed predictable. The same faces, the same jokes, and the same unshakable hierarchies. Students were divided into groups, and the staff, though an essential part of daily school life, were invisible. Especially the gardener, named Don Manuel. He always wore a modest smile and greeted respectfully, but no one paid attention to him. He was like part of the scenery, something simply there but without real weight. But then one day something changed. The students' voices were louder and crueler than ever before. Did you see old Manuel? He didn't look just like a gardener. He seemed like a boring guy. He has no style or anything. What can he do here? Laughter accompanied every comment. They mocked his old clothes, his dry and cracked hands, even his clumsy way of walking. But not only that. A group of boys clumsily mimicked him, dragging their feet down the hallway, mercilessly mocking him. No one expected Don Manuel himself to hear them. But he did, yet he never responded with resentment. Only a sad look and the same calm, unshakable demeanor that characterized him. He remained silent, but his heart beat strongly. Something inside him knew this couldn't go on. That very night, while the school remained dark and silent, Don Manuel sat in the small garage where he kept his tools and took out an old black briefcase. He carefully opened it, and inside were important documents. His resume, letters of recommendation, and most surprisingly, a certificate with his name and the Ministry of Education emblem accrediting Don Manuel as a graduate in school administration. No one, not even his co-workers, knew about this hidden and brilliant side of his story. Because his humility was so great that he never spoke of his merits or his dreams. But he had patiently waited for his moment. The next day he crossed the gate with a different step, a firm step. He wore an impeccable suit, his hands now clean and groomed, and a perfectly knotted tie. The students didn't recognize him at first. They wondered who this man was, walking so authoritatively toward the main office. Whispers were heard. "Who is that guy?" Some thought he was a new teacher, others a newly arrived inspector. Then, from behind the door of the office where the principal always sat, came Don Manuel. He was no longer just a gardener. Now he was the principal of Lincoln High, with all the authority and respect that position carries. His gaze was firm, but there was also a sparkle in his eyes, a mixture of justice and serenity. The students who had laughed at him were stunned. They didn't understand how, overnight, that man went from being the target of their mockery to the highest authority. No one had heard of his promotion, no one expected such an outcome. But the most striking thing was not his change in appearance, but Don Manuel's attitude. He showed no resentment. There were no harsh reprimands or immediate punishments. Rather, he spoke with wisdom and patience. He called an urgent meeting in the auditorium. With a calm voice, he told them that mockery and disrespect had no place in that school. But he did so without humiliating, instead inviting them to reflect. He shared fragments of his life, his studies, and how everyone carries a story that others do not see. "I am not just the man who cleans the garden. I am someone who wants to plant respect, learning, and unity here," he told them. His words flowed like a wave that filled every corner of the auditorium, leaving everyone speechless. That same afternoon, things began to change. The students who had mocked him started to see Don Manuel with different eyes. He was no longer just the gardener. He was the principal who had come to transform the school not through fear, but through motivation and empathy. Little by little, people understood that greatness is not measured by clothing or status, but by the dignity one carries. How had he achieved such a transformation? Why did no one know about Don Manuel's real education? That was the true mystery lingering in the air. As the weeks passed, the school changed its pace. There were new projects, activities that fostered unity, and Don Manuel's figure became a symbol of humility and strength. The story of the gardener who became principal became a legend among the students, but also a profound lesson for everyone. Now think for a moment. How many times do we judge someone by their appearance? How many times do we miss the chance to know their true value? Don Manuel's story leaves us with an open question, challenging us to look beyond appearances and value the potential in every person, no matter how they look on the outside. And meanwhile, in the shadows of that school, something still remains unrevealed. Because change is not just a story of promotion, but the beginning of a secret hidden beneath the green grass and flowers that Don Manuel tended every day. What mystery does that man who was mocked really hide? Could his past be even more surprising than everyone imagined? The story continues, and each day brings new challenges and discoveries. Because at Lincoln High, nothing is as it seems, and the true lesson is knowing when to look with an open heart. But this is just the beginning. The murmur gradually faded away, but a sharp tension could still be felt in the air, like a silence that foretells a storm. That morning at school, everything seemed normal, with students scattering into groups, exchanging laughter and plans for the weekend. However, there was a subtly different atmosphere, one that only a few could notice. Who would have thought that the man passing unnoticed among them, with his hands rough from the earth and his old, worn vest, would be the one to forever change the image of that school? The kids who had mocked the gardener could barely contain their giggles as they watched him from afar, despising what to them was nothing more than an ordinary man, an invisible man. Why bother talking to him? He doesn't seem to have anything interesting to say. They murmured among themselves with a tone that felt superior but actually hid their own insecurities. The figure of the gardener, with his humility and patience, went almost unnoticed by them, though not for long. The tired but serene face of that man hid secrets and plans nobody could imagine. Life at the school went on as usual, but for those who truly observed, some things began to feel out of place. The gardener, whom everyone ignored, showed an unusual calm. He no longer seemed bothered by the jokes or affected by the indifference. Instead, his eyes shone with a determination few could understand. That night, when the school closed its doors, he disappeared as quietly as he had arrived at dawn, leaving behind a trail of mystery. The next day, coming to class was marked by unexpected news that spread from mouth to mouth like an uncontrollable fire. "Did you hear? The new principal is here," someone said, with a mix of astonishment and curiosity. The students looked at each other, wondering what kind of person could take the reins of a place that for many was just part of their teenage days. Yet, no one expected what was about to happen. As he crossed the main hallway, the mocking laughter from yesterday turned into looks of surprise, and then into absolute silence. There he was, impeccable, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and shiny shoes. The same man who barely a day before gathered fallen leaves and watered plants with a humble smile. His upright figure, the sparkle in his eyes, and confident attitude spoke of someone completely different. No one could believe it. He was the new principal of the school. The news spread quickly, stirring a whirlwind of emotions and questions. How was it possible that the man they had despised without even knowing him now held all the power in his hands? What secrets did he hide to reach that position? And what was he truly seeking? The story of the gardener turned authority figure unleashed a wave of curiosity that no one could quell. Some students felt humiliated, others intrigued, but all knew that something big had begun, something that would change the rhythm of the school and their lives. The hallways, once filled with trivial chatter, were now filled with whispers heavy with anticipation. People spoke of his past in low voices, with extravagant theories and rumors that ran as fast as the wind. Was that man a former acquaintance of the school? Or simply a stranger with a hidden story? Speculation created an electric atmosphere like a taut rope about to snap. No one could detach themselves from the mystery surrounding the new principal. That very morning, in the middle of the first class, the door opened and the sound of firm, unmistakable footsteps captured all attention. There he was, with a presence that demanded immediate respect. His deep, calm voice cut through the murmur with natural authority. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "I know these words come from someone unexpected, but I am here to help you grow, not only as students but as people." However, behind that kindness was the determination of someone who knew very well what he was doing. The students who had underestimated him felt something inside them begin to tremble. Was he just a man with a new title? Or was there much more they could not see? That morning, as he walked through the school, overseeing every corner with attentive eyes and sharp mind, his gaze crossed once again with those same young people who had laughed at him. There were no reproaches, no threats. Just a powerful silence that seemed to say, "This is just the beginning." Each day brought new questions. How would the school be managed by a principal who had been the gardener? Would he change things or continue down the same routine path? Some students began to watch him from a different perspective, looking for signs, trying to understand what lay behind such an unexpected transformation. The principal's first decisions sparked mixed opinions, a tug-of-war between fear and hope. Classrooms that seemed forgotten began to be decorated, open spaces recovered, and old rules questioned. One day, during lunch, a group of curious students decided to approach and speak to him directly. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how did you go from being the gardener to principal so quickly? Isn't that strange?" one asked quietly, trying not to sound rude. The man looked at them with a serene smile and, without hesitation, began to share fragments of his story. He spoke of years of sacrifice, of how humility was not weakness but strength, and of how he had learned to observe and listen from the humblest corners, where neither desire nor talent seemed to matter. Each word opened new doors in their minds, challenging their beliefs and prejudices. They were not just before a man who had changed positions, but before someone who had lived and understood the school from another angle, someone who knew respect was not imposed by authority but earned by example. His story made them question not only who he was but also how they themselves saw themselves and whom they truly respected. Meanwhile, the relationship between the principal and the school community was adjusting. There were no abrupt changes or drastic decisions, but every step carried the clear intention of building a fairer environment where every voice counted. Discipline returned, yes, but administered with empathy and rigor. Students began to appreciate the figure of that man who walked among them without distance, reminding them that behind every role there is a story, a person capable of surprising. But the mystery still beat strongly. Where did that gardener really come from? What secret campaign or plan was he hiding? No one could help but imagine possible conspiracies, hidden success stories that no one knew. The teachers also aligned with surprise toward the figure of the new principal, some distrustful, others hopeful. Rumors mixed with half-truths, creating a unique atmosphere at the school, a play of light and shadow that kept interest alive. And it was on one of those afternoons, when most were already leaving, that an unexpected scene caught the attention of a few. In the main office, the man who had been the figure of gray days and seeds changed expression. He was speaking softly with someone on the other end of the phone, words no one else was supposed to hear. His eyes shifted between firmness and a sadness that revealed the internal battles of someone used to fighting in silence. But just when he seemed vulnerable, he regained composure and ended the call, leaving behind more secrets than answers. The pieces still didn't quite fit. The man who had been underestimated, ignored, and ridiculed was now in charge, but he did so with a subtlety that made one wonder if he had other hidden purposes. The school would never be the same again, and the students, those who had once laughed at him, were beginning to understand that the real surprise was just starting. Every step the new principal took opened a door to a greater mystery, to a story no one knew but soon would have to tell. Then, just when everything seemed under control, unexpected news arrived at the school through an internal email. The board had launched a plan to renovate the school, with projects that went far beyond what was visible, and the principal, with his experience and vision, would be the key player. But what kind of renovation was planned? Was it just an aesthetic improvement or a deep and radical transformation? A new tension settled in the air, and everyone knew that, after that unexpected morning, they could not look away. A barely perceptible smile appeared on the principal's face. He knew the real game was starting now, and that, little by little, those who had underestimated him would discover much more than just a change of title. Because, in reality, the garden he had cared for with such care would not only bloom in the courtyard, but in every soul at the school willing to grow. And the real question was, who would be ready for that blooming? We hadn't expected the day to end with such a huge surprise. The mocking laughter of a few still lingered in the air as the sun hid behind the evening clouds, but what was going to happen the next day would be such a brutal twist that no one could have foreseen it. That morning, the hallways seemed normal. The murmur and light footsteps followed their usual rhythm, but an invisible tension floated in the air. Some students couldn't help but cast furtive glances toward the main office, which had always been a place shrouded in mystery for everyone else. The scarcest rumors spoke of a new principal who had arrived without announcement or introduction, just a small sign on the door changing the name, but nothing more. What no one imagined was that the man who had worked all last year among flowers and tools, the same one we had all trampled with mockery and looks of disdain, was about to appear there, in the administrative heart of the school, looking imposing, dressed impeccably, with an attitude that exuded respect and authority. Yes, exactly, the humble gardener we thought unworthy, the one who seemed invisible beneath his cap and his hands full of dirt, was now the new principal. Suddenly, everything fit together, but it also began to unravel. How had something like this happened without anyone finding out? Who was this man really? The questions multiplied as the students began to recall every moment they had seen him, judged him, ignored or underestimated him. Humility hid deeper secrets that everyone wanted to unearth. They, who sometimes had laughed at his worn-out clothes and quiet gestures, now looked at him with different eyes. But the story was just beginning, because behind that unexpected metamorphosis, there was something more, something that transcended the simple change of position. In the school where appearances ruled, a man was proving that power is not always found where one expects it, and that the greatest lessons come from unexpected places. As the day went on, small details revealed themselves on their own. The way the new principal walked through the halls, observing everyone with a mixture of serenity and firmness, how the teachers bowed respectfully as he passed, and how voices lowered when he entered the classrooms. There was no trace of the man we had known. Now something different occupied that place, a different energy that promised profound changes. But then doubts arose. Some students secretly approached the teachers, trying to discover more about who this character was. And what they found not only surprised them but sparked an even stronger flame of intrigue. Most of the faculty had known this man for years. Many had had him as a student or had heard of his merits elsewhere, but no one seemed willing to tell his full story, as if something warned that the truth could destabilize the school's routine. Meanwhile, the gardener turned principal seemed to be making subtle but effective changes. The harmony of the school began to transform. The complaints that were recurrent started to decrease. Even the students who had previously mocked him now seemed to face a suppressed respect when crossing his path. The tension felt different, palpable, a mix of admiration and an unknown hint of fear. What was this man planning? What did he know that we didn't? While all this was happening, suspicious looks did not cease. A small group, who had previously never stopped making jokes at the gardener's expense, began to question the reason behind his change. What if he's not just the principal, they wondered. What if he's here for something bigger? Suspicions grew more and more, creating a web of doubts that seemed impossible to unravel. Every conversation in the halls generated new theories, from those who believed he was an undercover spy for the administration to those who thought some hidden conspiracy had occurred to sideline the former principals. Rumors spread fast and, curiously, the new principal didn't seem to worry about any of it. His calm was absolute, almost cold, and that unsettled everyone because in a place full of gossip and secrets, absolute calm is never accidental. But the biggest mystery remained unsolved. Where had that man come from? What was the story behind that gardener no one really knew? Just one day before, we had seen him carrying pots and caring for bushes tenderly. Today, with a simple smile, he was signing documents that affected everyone's life at the school. The transformation was so abrupt that no one could get the most basic question out of their head. Why? Why would someone who lived among plants and soil now be in charge of setting the rules at a school? And most importantly, what lessons did he intend to teach us? Because it was clear that this change was not simply a promotion. There was a hidden reason, a deeper intention that hinted at a very important lesson about respect, greatness, and true power. Meanwhile, those who had laughed at him, those who had belittled him without knowing him, found themselves forced to face the mirror of their own attitudes. And at the same time, that revelation opened the door to hope. Because if someone so simple and forgotten had been able to change his destiny and that of the entire school, what limits were there for any of them? As the day came to an end, the new principal closed his office door with a final gesture that seemed to hold a secret. A spark in his eyes showed that his mission was just beginning. And the students, caught between surprise and uncertainty, understood that this story was far from over, that the next chapters would bring lessons as harsh as they were necessary. Thus, deep down, everyone began to realize something fundamental. Never judge someone only by what you see. Because true strength resides in a humble heart, and true greatness needs no applause or ostentation to shine. The gardener had changed his world and now challenged them to change theirs. Would they be ready for that challenge? That was the mystery lingering in the air as the school closed, and no one, not even him, seemed ready to answer it yet. When the group's laughter began to subside, an uncomfortable silence took its place. No one expected that someone like the gardener could be more than just a simple observer behind the hedge. But reality was about to take an impossible turn. The next day, the school routine seemed like any other morning. Students arranged their backpacks, chatted with friends, some murmured about the weekend soccer game, others dreamed about the upcoming exam. Until then, something caught everyone's attention. From the main entrance, a man walked with steady steps, impeccably dressed, elegant and confident, but the most surprising thing was that it was him. Yes, the same man they had seen that afternoon, dressed in worn clothes, now moved with an overwhelming presence and a look that admitted no doubt. It was the gardener. But this time he was not carrying tools or tending the plants. He was in the school's main office, and everyone knew what that meant. The man they had ignored and mocked was, without a doubt, the new principal. A murmur spread like dry fire among the students. How could it be possible? What had happened overnight for the humble gardener to become the highest authority figure at the school? Some were frozen in place, others looked at each other in disbelief, and a few, the most mischievous, couldn't help but wonder how their jokes would look now. Was this going to be a lesson for them? Or perhaps a hidden opportunity? As the man in the suit crossed the hallway, his gaze seemed to say he had observed more than anyone imagined. And that complicated everything. 4 years that man had been there, almost invisible to most, carrying bags of soil, watering flowers, giving life to a space no one valued. But what no one knew was the reason for his silence and discretion. At first, he seemed just a simple gardener, someone who had arrived recently to do his job without drawing attention. However, thoughts began to collapse in the minds of several young people who remembered seeing him long before that day. Was he just a gardener then? Or was his humility part of a bigger plan? Questions kept arising, and with each doubt, a new, more unsettling theory was born. The new principal not only appeared immaculately dressed, he also changed the school's dynamic instantly. The teachers noticed his direct and efficient style, but also his unknown empathy. Between classes, students heard how he corrected firmly, yes, but also with deep knowledge of every corner of the school, even the most neglected ones. His first action was to order better care for the garden, to keep the environment cleaner. As if he truly cared about every small detail because he knew much more than appearance depended on it. He talked with every employee, visited every classroom, and at the same time, seemed to be observing those kids who had once underestimated him. Was he expecting something? An opportunity to change the story? The mystery grew, and with every step he took, the principal made it clear he was not there by chance. Among the students, reactions varied. Some began to feel ashamed, others scared, and a few genuinely curious. Suddenly, the man they had considered insignificant became a symbol of power and respect. The one who seemed invisible could now decide the fate of their lives within the school. But the strangest thing was that, despite everything, he held no grudge. Instead of seeking revenge, his gaze conveyed a silent lesson about the value of humility and respect. However, that did not stop some restless minds from wanting to understand how he had managed to become principal without anyone knowing, how he had changed so much in so little time. Had he been playing a role from the start? Did he have a past very different from what he showed? The true story came to light in a special meeting called by the new principal. In a room filled with anticipation and murmurs, the man stood before the entire school community, with a soft but confident smile, and began to speak. He told them that, in reality, he had started his career at that school not as a gardener, but long ago as a student. His family had gone through economic difficulties, forcing him to accept that job to stay close to the education he loved. But he had not settled for that. In his free time, he had studied educational administration and leadership. That was when he decided to return, first quietly, to thoroughly understand the strengths and weaknesses of the school. Thus, he was never just a student or an employee, but a discreet observer with a clear goal: to transform that place he loved from within, without boasting, without rushing, without leaving anyone out. The community was shocked. The boys who had mocked him now felt trapped between admiration and guilt. How could they judge someone without knowing the whole story? How could they value something or someone who seemed small when they might hide a giant world inside? There was something much deeper in the principal than the mere polished image and formal power. He was a man who had learned resilience, patience, and respect, and now used them to guide others. But one question remained: how would he truly change the school? Because this story did not end with a simple revelation. It was just beginning to unfold its true lessons. As the meeting progressed, some students timidly approached him, seeking to understand more. The principal not only listened but also responded with honesty and hope. He spoke about inclusion, about valuing one another, about the power of education to transform lives. He reminded everyone that appearances deceive, and respect is earned through small actions, not titles. But his gaze also warned that, for change to be real, everyone had to participate and leave behind old prejudices. His arrival was the chance to reinvent the school, so no one would be invisible as he once had been. And although many still doubted, others felt a new spark, a hope they didn't know they could have. In the weeks that followed, school life began to change. Not only because the principal planned new activities, renovated spaces, or enforced stricter rules. Something changed inside the students, the teachers, and the entire staff. They began to look at each other with new eyes, discovering hidden talents, recognizing that everyone, without exception, had a unique value. Those who had once laughed at the gardener began to learn the greatest lesson. Never underestimate anyone by their appearance or position. Because sometimes the humblest people carry within them the greatest strength, the deepest wisdom, and the courage to change everything. And that gardener, now principal, became the best example that second chances exist, and it's never too late to surprise and make history. But there were still secrets to discover, and new challenges to face. Because power comes with responsibilities and difficulties, especially when expectations are high and emotions run deep. The story of the new principal, the gardener nobody saw coming, was just beginning to reveal its true chapters. What obstacles would he have to overcome? How would he face doubts and resistance? And what role would those students who once mocked him play? That answer, was hidden in every corner of the school, ready to come to light at the right moment. And only those willing to see beyond the obvious could discover it. Thus, the school transformed into a stage where nothing was as it seemed, and where each day promised a new lesson to learn, a story to tell, a truth to reveal. That morning, the school was wrapped in a different atmosphere. A murmur ran through the hallways, as if a small, invisible storm had begun to form. The students, standing by their lockers, spoke in whispers, casting knowing glances toward the main office, that forbidden cave where only teachers and staff had access. No one could believe what they had seen minutes earlier. The gardener, that man everyone had ignored, had materialized there, dressed in a suit they never imagined he could own. It wasn't just any suit. Impeccable, fitted, with details that shimmered under the fluorescent light. He looked like an actor in a play, but he was there in reality. And worst of all for them, there was no humble smile on his face nor an evasive look. There was power, authority. There where decisions were made, he stood. The new principal. The contrast was overwhelming. Just a day before, some of those same kids had laughed behind his back while the gardener turned the soil and watered the flowers promptly and carefully, but with an almost invisible humility. "What's all the fuss for if he's just a gardener?" they whispered disdainfully. It was nothing more than a cruel game to them, a fleeting amusement. However, that shining and severe image in the office shattered all their certainties. 5 minutes earlier, what? How can someone who seemed so insignificant now be at the very heart of the school? They thought, incredulous. And as that thought clashed in their heads, the sound of hurried footsteps forced them to disperse. It was the first day of the new order, though no one yet knew what it entailed. A group of students quickly gathered, unaware that the course of the coming hours would forever change the dynamics of the place. Among them was Lucia, a restless girl who had always felt a strange respect for the gardener, although she had never voiced it. There was also Matteo, the de facto leader of the group, who had thrown relentless mockery the day before. He was the first to point at the office from a distance. "Did you see that? There's no way that guy is principal. It has to be a joke." But something in his voice betrayed that he wasn't so sure, that fear was beginning to creep in amidst the disbelief. It wasn't just a matter of appearance. It was the attitude, the confidence, the way the man seemed to have taken over the place without permission, without asking, as if he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. The students soon noticed that something else had changed besides the gardener's impeccable suit. The teachers, usually distant, shared strange looks, some of admiration, others of silent respect, as if the arrival of the man had altered something in the school's hierarchy. Donna Carmen, the math teacher who rarely raised her voice, was even seen having coffee with the new principal, an unprecedented scene that confirmed the suspicion that something serious and fascinating was happening. Meanwhile, rumors began to emerge in the hallways. Who was that man? How had he risen so quickly to that position? What secrets did the flawless uniform he now wore hide? Tension grew, and with every rumor, the mystery tightened even more. Lucia couldn't help but remember that brief exchange she had with the gardener a few days earlier. He had only smiled at her with a certain sadness, and when she asked if he had always worked at the school, the man avoided the answer and only said, "Some roots run deeper than what you see on the surface." That phrase, which had seemed a simple poetic riddle at the time, now echoed strongly in Lucia's mind, who felt there was a story buried beneath the bark of that uniform and the earth he turned day by day. Who was that man, really? What did he know about the school that others ignored? As the students debated, the day continued with a forced normality, like when in a suspense movie you know the calm is just a prelude to the storm. At noon, an announcement over the loudspeaker set everyone's hearts racing. "Please, we call the entire educational community to the auditorium for an urgent meeting with the new principal." Not even the teachers knew what to expect. Lines formed quickly, and within seconds the auditorium was filled to the last seat, as students took their places with looks ranging from curious to nervous. Finally, the man appeared on stage. Lucia felt the air stop as he opened the door. He was not just the gardener turned principal, but now had an aura of authority that eclipsed everyone in the room. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the space and froze the whispers. "I know many of you have underestimated me," he began. "I know you have seen only the appearances of my work and of myself, but today I'm going to show you that what seems insignificant is sometimes the strongest root." The room fell into absolute silence. Each word fired questions. What did he mean by that? What revelations would he bring? And what new rules were about to change everyone's lives? Before he could continue, a hand rose. It was Matteo, who surprised everyone with a mixture of courage and disdain. "So what? Just because you put on a suit, do you think you're better than us? Why did a man like that come here? Who do you think you are?" The auditorium held its breath. The principal's answer was a serene smile, almost compassionate. "I didn't come to be better than anyone. I came to remind you all that respect is earned and that appearances do not define who we truly are. But there is something you should know, something that will change your perspective." Those words let out a collective sigh. The atmosphere was charged with expectation. What secret did the new principal hide? What was the real purpose behind that flawless suit and his sudden rise? At that moment, as everyone awaited the revelation, a familiar figure appeared from the side door of the auditorium. Mrs. Martha, the custodian, who looked nervous but determined. She walked up to the stage and with a firm voice said, "Not everything has been told yet. There is a story behind this man that few know. And only those who listen until the end will understand why he is here." The murmur turned into a wave of curiosity that enveloped the room. Lucia felt she was on the edge of a precipice, ready to discover the truth hidden beneath layers of silence and prejudice. Something big, unexpected was about to happen. Something that would rewrite the history of this school and its inhabitants forever. But just at that moment, the sound of the bell cut the session short and everything returned to usual activity. The students left the auditorium with wide eyes and their minds spinning with 1,000 thoughts. The meeting ended abruptly, leaving more questions than answers. Uncertainty was a sweet poison. Would the principal come back to tell his story? Or would the shadows over his identity and motives remain forever? The day went on amid whispers and furtive glances. Everyone wanted to understand, but no one knew how to approach that truth slipping right through their hands. Lucia, however, decided she would not let the opportunity slip away. As soon as she could, she searched for the principal in the hallways. She found him exactly where the school still seemed to breathe the echo of his presence, in the main garden among flowers and trees. There, the principal no longer wore the suit. He was once again the simple man who turned the soil carefully. "Why did you do that?" she asked him, pointing to the empty auditorium. He looked at her with a mix of nostalgia and determination. Because change is neither immediate nor obvious. Sometimes you have to make an impact for something true to start growing. Lucia sensed that behind those words was a world of stories to tell, wounds to heal, and perhaps justice to achieve. Every step of the day had shattered their idea of him, yet that man remained an enigma. How had he gone from the silence of the garden to the power of the main office? What revenge, what dream, or what plan did he hide beneath that silence and that suit? As Lucia walked away, one last question shone in her mind. Were they really ready to discover the whole truth, or had they only scratched the first layer of a much deeper and darker mystery? The school, with its lights on and hallways full of secrets, seemed to still hold many surprises. And he, the new principal, the gardener who was never just that, was the key they all needed to find. But no one yet knew how to search for. He spent a different morning at school. The murmur in the hallways began with a different, almost electric atmosphere. Legend has it that in those first minutes of the day, when you least expect it, the world can take a sudden turn. And that was exactly what happened. All the kids came face to face with something that challenged their prejudices, their laughter, and their mockery. That humble gardener, whom they simply called the Plant Man, appeared the next day dressed in an impeccable suit that shone under the lights of the main office. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope. What once seemed simple and ordinary suddenly contained secrets no one had imagined. The kids, still fresh from their mockery, couldn't hide their surprise. How could the man who swept leaves reluctantly and barely exchanged words with them have enough power to occupy the most respected position in the school? His change was so dramatic it seemed not only a transformation in appearance but a revelation. Tension grew on every face, in every silence loaded with uncertainty. Because they were not just facing someone different but a truth that challenged them to rethink everything they had believed until then. The school, that known and predictable territory, became a stage where the rules were rewritten. The students who thought they owned the place began to doubt, to question what once seemed obvious. Who really deserved respect? How quickly do we build judgments based on appearances? That shadow of doubt slipped in like a cold wind, and with every proud gesture and superior glance, it became more evident that something deep was about to change. Of course, the new principal didn't waste time. His gaze, now clear and steady, roamed every corner with the experience of someone who has lived beyond the surface. There were no flashes of revenge or reproach in his silence, only an air of calm that seemed to say, "I have come for something bigger than you, and you're only beginning to realize it." His presence commanded respect, but not in the traditional way. Rather, with the weight of history and mystery that the students could not explain. The kids began to murmur, throwing out small theories. Some said he was an important relative. Others said he had secret connections with powerful people. But no rumor gained solid ground. Meanwhile, that gardener, with his calloused hands and calm smile, seemed to float above those doubts effortlessly. It was as if what they had ignored was now his secret power. The atmosphere changed. What had once been thoughtless laughter turned into cautious looks and measured steps. Some tried to get closer to discover details, to understand what was behind that new facade. But the mystery was just beginning to unfold its first layers. Within the school's walls, there was more than a man disguised as a principal. There was a story hidden beneath fertile, silent ground, waiting to be unearthed. And while some struggled to pretend normalcy, others couldn't help but secretly wonder, what other secrets did that man guard? How had he reached that place? Perhaps by paths they never imagined. Each question was a thread opening a new skein of doubts and curiosity, and the school day became a puzzle no one wanted to leave unfinished. The gardener's change to principal was not just a surprise for them. It was a mirror reflecting their own limitations. At what moments had they judged without knowing? How many potentials had they let slip away due to prejudice? These were uncomfortable but necessary questions. Because sometimes, the hardest and most valuable lesson arrives when you least expect it, when a seemingly insignificant figure suddenly shows you that power lies in places you never thought to look. On that heavy day full of surprises, a new idea began to circulate among the students. He was no longer just that gardener, but someone who had crossed invisible borders, who had challenged stereotypes with silence as his shield and dignity as his sword. And that reality forced them to rethink themselves, to question how valuable someone is when they lack the expected suit, last name, or social status. The new principal never boasted. He didn't need to justify his presence or demonstrate authority with shouts or punishments. His very existence, that mixture of calm and determination, was enough for the entire school to perhaps learn the most important lesson. Appearances can be mirages, and respect is earned through deep values, not superficial labels. Suddenly, the hallways filled with small glances of complicity toward that man, who continued his routine with the same humility but now transformed by the invisible strength of his name and story. His presence was a constant and silent reminder that they had only seen the tip of the iceberg, while beneath the surface lay stories worthy of being heard before passing judgment. Every time one of the kids passed near the principal's office, they felt a shiver, not just because of the figure behind the glass, but because of the palpable evidence that life could take an unexpected turn for those who show nothing. It was a living lesson that forced them to open their eyes and put aside easy arrogance, because sometimes the greatest leaders come from places no one imagines. But, of course, nothing is solved with a single surprise. The most striking moment was yet to come, and every step the new principal took seemed to point toward something greater. Something that had been hidden, waiting for the right time to emerge and transform not only the school but every person who lived there. The young people who once laughed in the hallways began to notice small details. Changes in the school dynamics, adjustments to rules that not only affected discipline but the way they related to each other. It was clear that this man's arrival not only disrupted their daily routine. He was rewriting the unwritten rules of respect and coexistence. Some tried to anticipate his moves, like playing chess with an invisible opponent. They wanted to understand if behind that calm there was a hidden strategy, a deeper intention. But the principal, always serene, moved with sure and silent steps, letting them question themselves and confront their own prejudices. Little by little, the school began to become a different place. Hurtful words lost weight, and in their place, more mature conversations began to emerge, though still filled with skepticism. The transformation was neither fast nor perfect, but it was evident. And in the middle of it all, that man who had been the object of mockery was now a silent beacon lighting a different path. But not everyone accepted that change easily. Some resisted, clinging to their old perceptions, clouded by fear of the unknown. They wanted to see the new principal as an intruder, a threat to their small kingdom of fleeting power. That resistance gave rise to palpable tensions, which only heightened the excitement and risk in the story that was just beginning to unfold. Just when it seemed calm was about to settle, something unexpected happened. An off-hours meeting in the principal's office gathered several skeptical students and others curious. There, before their eyes, a fragment of the true story of the man everyone knew only for his garden and silences began to be revealed. What he told, with a steady voice and bright eyes, was a story of struggle, resilience, and dreams not abandoned. He recounted how he had come to the school years before with a single purpose: to transform life through care, not only of plants but of people. His love for that place went beyond work. It was his spiritual home and life project. As he spoke, the kids' faces changed. From disbelief they moved to admiration, and from there to genuine amazement. They realized they had judged poorly, that their mockery was based on ignorance. They also understood that someone's power does not come from the uniform but from the character and passion with which they face life. But the story didn't end there. Just when they thought they had discovered the real man, the moment came for the final question, the one that exploded like a bomb in the room. What secret did that man really keep, and why had he waited for the exact moment to reveal his identity? The ultimate revelation was about to arrive, and no student could be prepared for what they would hear next. The day closed with a different atmosphere. There were no more mocking laughs or contemptuous looks. Instead, a new and silent respect settled among those young people who were learning, even if unwilling to admit it, that life sometimes laughs at those who underestimate it. Because in the simplest stories lie truths so great they forever change the way we see the world. And as the sun set over the school, In that office where there had once been only a gardener, there was now a principal who, through his actions more than words, was ready to show what it truly means to lead. The journey was just beginning, and all of them, without knowing it, were about to witness something much greater than a simple promotion in the school hierarchy. The next morning arrived quickly, filled with a strange silence, as if the entire school was holding its breath. The same light that had illuminated the courtyard just 24 hours earlier, where the students had laughed at the gardener, now seemed tinged with a different hue. As the young people began arriving at their classrooms, the usual bustle of arrival was gradually replaced by a murmur, first weak, then growing louder and faster. Something was happening, something no one would forget. As they walked toward the school, Clara and Bruno exchanged nervous glances. He, who had been one of the cruelest to Don Ernesto, was beginning to feel a pang of remorse piercing his chest. The question kept spinning relentlessly in his mind. What was really going on with that man who had always seemed so quiet, so invisible to them? Clara, less daring when it came to confrontation, barely let out a whisper. "Are you sure you saw it right, Bruno? That it was him?" "In the principal's office." "I wasn't the only one who saw it," Bruno replied in a low voice, quickening his pace. "Several of us saw it, and I can't get it out of my head." He was dressed in a flawless suit. No one would have recognized him if it weren't for the fact that it was his face, the same gardener from yesterday. But the new principal. His voice trembled slightly as he said it, as if confirming that absurd reality forced him to face a truth he hadn't expected. Crossing the metal gate, the air seemed charged with electricity. Students whispered among themselves, their eyes searching for any detail that would confirm this was no dream. No one spoke aloud, but their faces betrayed disbelief and confusion. Don Ernesto, the man so many had ridiculed, had disappeared from his usual space among plants and hoses, and was now walking firmly through the main hallways of the school, traversing a territory that yesterday had seemed unreachable. "How is this possible?" someone muttered angrily. "Why didn't he tell us? Did he want us to look down on him while he watched us working in the shadows?" The words fell like stones, striking the school's atmosphere with force. Among those listening, Clara remembered something she had seen the afternoon before when she accompanied her younger brother to the library to look for a book. She had seen Don Ernesto seated at a table with several documents and plans spread out before him. What seemed a simple garden actually hid an ambitious project behind it, a vision beyond their youthful and superficial eyes. Could that be what the man was preparing? A plan that would culminate in this unexpected turn in his life. As the bell signaled the start of classes, the same students who hours before had mocked now couldn't help but watch every move of the man they also knew so well. Don Ernesto entered the main building with the firmness of someone who knows every corner and every secret, showing no signs of the tension evident in others. No one dared interrupt his passage. It was as if an invisible veil surrounded him, protecting him from judgment and disbelief. Bruno approached briefly the spot where days ago he had pointed and laughed at the gardener, as if wanting to apologize to the air. "This can't end like this," he said with a mix of guilt and admiration. He knew he had to find answers, not only to understand why Don Ernesto now dominated the school, but also to discover who this man they had ignored and humiliated without reason really was. The first class passed with an unusual silence. The teachers, some still confused, hadn't spoken much about the new principal. However, the students couldn't concentrate. Everything revolved around that enigma. How had Don Ernesto reached that position? What clues had he left them? A deep sigh escaped Clara as she looked out the window and saw the flowers Don Ernesto had planted months before, now seeming to come alive with brighter colors. Maybe we never really saw beyond what seemed simple, she thought. When recess time came, the tension exploded into a new burst of rumors. "They say he's been vice principal for years and just acted as a gardener by his own choice," someone said, though no one could confirm the information. Others say he was secretly promoted because they want to change the whole system, that Don Ernesto is the key piece in a master plan. Each version was more incredible than the last, and no one knew what to believe. But what was clear was something darker and more urgent. The relationship they once had with Don Ernesto would never be the same. The power now radiating from him from that office on the upper floor was a constant reminder that appearances are deceiving, and that hidden stories can change in the blink of an eye. The ironic smiles of some students contrasted with the serious and determined looks of others. Clara observed it all, feeling for the first time something very close to respect. Then, amidst that everyday chaos, a detail few noticed emerged. Don Ernesto not only wore a new suit, but he had also changed the way he spoke. Firmer, more convinced, like the captain of a ship who knows exactly where he wants to go. During the assembly called that very morning, his words were clear. This school needs to grow. We all need to learn to respect, not only people but also what they represent. We will no longer be witnesses to mockery or deceit that destroy without reason. As he spoke, some students felt chills, as if that man, who just days before barely spoke to them, was now a mirror reflecting their own flaws. Don Ernesto's story, which seemed so simple and unimportant, slowly unfolded before them, revealing layers and secrets no one expected. Who was the man behind the overalls and dusty boots? What had motivated him to accept such a lowly role, only to emerge with so much power and conviction? Questions began to pile up, forcing each student to rethink their prejudices and their way of seeing the world. The image of the humble gardener was nothing more than the surface of a much deeper and more complex iceberg. Clara thought about how, without realizing it, they had excluded a man who really knew the history and the heart of that school like no one else. One who knew when to water not only the flowers in the courtyard but also the trust, respect, and dignity that seemed to have been forgotten. Bruno sat beside her, silent, but with a renewed sense of awe. The day moved forward, and with every step, Don Ernesto moved farther from the figure they had despised to become the symbol of a necessary change. The new principal had arrived quietly, but his presence was now an earthquake shaking the foundations of a community that thought it understood everything but was only just beginning to comprehend. As the sun set, leaving a warm glow on the horizon, Clara glanced one last time at the principal's office, where the lights remained on. That image stayed engraved in her mind as a promise. Sometimes those we least expect are the ones who can most transform our reality. And it was only a matter of time before everyone discovered what it truly meant to have Don Ernesto as a guide. But just as it seemed calm had returned, a new rumor began to circulate. Something about old letters found in his office, a mystery buried in documents no one had seen, a mystery that would surely shake everything they thought they knew even more. What secrets did Don Ernesto hide? What was in those letters that they feared would come to light? The story was just beginning, and yesterday's gardener was only the first piece of a much larger and more fascinating puzzle. That night, amid the echoes of the empty school, only one certainty remained. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, the school woke up to the sharp rumor floating through the hallways. "Did you see the gardener? Now he's the principal." No one wanted to believe it. Not even those who had laughed out loud just hours before, pointing at him as the man with rough hands and an overall stained with dirt who barely managed to keep the garden clean. But there he was, a flawless figure behind the main office window, dressed in an expensive suit, standing upright, with a gaze that commanded respect and mystery in equal measure. Martín and his friends watched silently, incredulous. How could it be possible? Had the humble gardener always been playing a role that no one saw? Or had it all been an illusion from the start? Yesterday's laughter seemed like a distant echo compared to the heavy silence of disbelief this morning. The school looked the same but, without knowing why, everything seemed different. As if a huge secret had slipped in along with that unknown man. No one dared to speak to him, and Francesca, the most curious of the group, suggested they approach him. "Let's ask him," she said with a mix of defiance and nervousness. But before anyone could respond, the bell announced the start of classes. Their glances met, conspiratorial and intrigued. What was real and what was not? How could someone who seemed like a simple gardener become the highest authority in one day without explanation? Curiosity bit hard, and they had to wait until recess, when the principal came down from his office to make an unexpected announcement that raised even more questions. The man's voice, firm and clear, filled the courtyard. "Dear students, I know many of you must be surprised, even confused. But today you begin a new chapter, one where no one will be judged by their appearance or where they come from." No one yet understood what he meant by those words, but it was enough for that group to remember the mockery from the day before and to feel, for the first time, uncomfortable in the very school they thought they knew. Martin felt a lump in his throat. Could it be that this man had been closer to them than they imagined? As he tried to understand, he saw that his friends also found no answers. But he, always restless, decided he couldn't remain without knowing the truth. That afternoon, after everyone had left, he returned to the garden, searching for clues, signs, anything that could explain that impossible change. He found some handwritten pages, like a diary forgotten under a bush. He carefully took them and read, "Never underestimate the value of a person. True authority is not in hierarchy, but in the ability to understand, change, and lead with the heart." The handwriting was firm, and the words seemed to whisper a secret much deeper than the simple promotion of an employee to principal. Who was that man really? What was he hiding behind that impeccable suit and that calm smile that Martin now saw every day? As the day ended and shadows grew, Martin felt that this story was just beginning. That beneath the layers of soil and concrete of the school, there was a mystery no student had yet discovered. And that, somehow, the gardener not only cared for plants but also cultivated a change that seemed irreversible. Who would teach whom? That question kept Martin awake that night, sleepless, imagining that the true lesson was just about to begin. Has it ever happened to you that a simple gesture completely changes the way you see someone? Today you are going to hear a story that will make you think twice before judging someone who seems insignificant. Because what started with laughter and teasing ended up being one of the biggest surprises in the whole school. Imagine that the man everyone underestimated, the humble gardener whom nobody noticed, not only had a secret but was also someone you never imagined seeing in power. I promise what happened next will leave you speechless. It all began with some boys who couldn't contain their mockery toward the man who went around cleaning and watering the plants. They thought his job was simple, boring, and that he had absolutely nothing important to do there. To them, the gardener was just an accessory at the school, something that only existed to keep the courtyard pretty while they were in class or on recess. But what if I told you that this mistaken perception was exactly the key to an unexpected twist? Things are not always what they seem, and this story proves it emphatically. The school was an ordinary place, with standard classrooms, a courtyard with trees, and an old clock that seemed to mark every wasted second by the students. Among those students were 4 kids who spent their time joking with each other, but mostly teasing the gardener. Their names were Lucas, Martina, Diego, and Anna. Each had their own reason to laugh, although none made much real sense. While they whispered and glanced sideways at the man in his green uniform and gloves, the gardener listened to them but never responded. In his eyes, there was something no student had noticed, a deep calm and a spark that seemed to hold more than just a love for plants. That morning began like any other, with the kids doing their usual prank, hiding his things, throwing some leaves at him as they passed by, and murmuring low comments. They thought the gardener didn't realize it, that he was an insignificant and submissive guy. But right the next day something changed everything. Crossing the hallway to class, Lucas saw something that chilled him to the bone. There, in the main office, was the gardener. Not with his worn gloves or green shirt, but dressed in an impeccable suit, a neatly knotted tie, and an expression that left no doubt. He was the new school principal. The kids froze, their laughter caught in their throats, and disbelief took hold of them. How was it possible that the man they had underestimated, the one they considered insignificant, was now sitting with authority, making decisions, and leading the entire school? But there was more. Soon they realized it was not just a formality. The new principal seemed to know every corner of the school and had innovative ideas that left everyone amazed. Not only that, but his look when he found them in the courtyard, still with a subtle smile, made them understand that there was much more behind his work as a gardener. The 4 kids began to wonder who that man really was. How could he go from taking care of plants to leading a whole educational institution? What secrets was he hiding? And the most unsettling question, what had he seen in them since before he hadn't even looked at them? As classes continued and school life returned to its routine, each student started to remember small moments, details that had never caught their attention but now took on new meaning. Fleeting glances, words said in a low voice, and subtle gestures the man had made without them realizing. The story, which had seemed like a simple anecdote about an ignored gardener, was now turning into a nearly tangible mystery at the heart of the school. And here, just when you thought you had seen it all, the Gardner principal had something else prepared. Something that was not only going to change their perception but the whole school community's. Because what seemed like a role reversal was actually just the tip of the iceberg of a much deeper story, with lessons nobody expected to learn. So stay tuned because what comes next has twists that will give you goosebumps. Next time you see someone unimportant, think twice. Sometimes life has very curious ways of surprising us and showing that every person, no matter how humble they seem, carries inside a power that no one imagines. And this story is just beginning. Are you ready to discover the principal's true face?